Okay, should be able to see that now.
Perfect.
Okay, that's where we started. Is that right? Yes. Okay, so the E stands for environmental. That's what most people talk about. The social aspect, when it comes to human rights and labour and diversity in practices, that has become more and more discussed as we've moved through. So I'd say that's probably quite a present, quite a hot topic in terms of what genders are in the boards, whether we're treating our workers correctly, what the environment is like in work as well. And all companies are being brought into this ESG type regime. Okay, so everyone is judged upon how they are treating their workers now. Okay, and then governments as well, making sure that at a board level that there's transparency, and we're making sure that the rules and regulations are ethical, effectively. So every company is given an ESG score. Some do it 1 out of 1 to 3, some do it 1 to 100, but every company is given an ESG score, and that relates to what well, the level of investment that that company could get now and in the future. Okay, so it has gone from, in the past, being that you would have strictly ethical investments, whereas now there is an overarching sort of ethical stance on all companies, okay, and how it's run. So as it says at the bottom, ESG is no longer optional; it's a core priority for businesses, and that's what will get more people to invest in that business, and more staff to stay and stick around, really. So why does it matter? As it says, drive sustainable growth. We know that unethical practices have been used in the past, and there are several examples of that blowing up in a major way. For example, oil spills, or retail fashion that was, fast fashion, disposable clothing and things like that. That leaks out into the press, and all of a sudden that no longer becomes a desirable brand to deal with. And we found that that is not sustainable based on today's values. Okay, does it meet the stakeholder expectations? That's also important as well, because it's not just about bottom line, it's not just about profit. It's also about making sure that you are doing the right things by the people, by the environment, and by the people that are going to be investing in your product. Okay. Overall, as we've seen previously, as I mentioned with oil spills, for example, you've got the Deep Water Rising, I think was the film that was made out of the major oil spill of BP. But there are costs and risks involved in not being ethical, huge costs that can occur during these times. And if you're not following procedures, if you're not following regulations, they can cause incredible problems as well. On top of that, it builds trust and reputations, and as it says, it aligns with the regulations, which there are a lot more of now compared with how they used to be in the past. So previously, there was a general consensus of ethical investments and ESG, which, if you think back to 20 years ago, 30 years ago, what were your thoughts on being ethical? It tended to be perhaps someone growing their own food, someone loving trees, someone who was maybe a vegetarian, someone who in the past said, I do not want XYZ. So I don't want tobacco. I do not want any arms. I do not want to deal with any oil products. Okay. So it was about excluding things. And that tended to be what ethical meant. I do not want something. Okay. In the present day, it's more about making an impact and sustainability on investments. And companies and businesses and practices. Okay, so what can you do that's sustainable now and that will last for a long time moving forward? Okay, So that's why you have regulatory bodies, that's why you have legislation that's passed, and much more positive screening. So I want this in my portfolio rather than I do not want that. And we found that's much more prevalent when I speak to clients now. There's less trying to screen things out. More people want to try and do good with their investments, because it's a, if I'm dealing with pensions, which is the second largest asset in the country, a lot of people don't necessarily have disposable income that they can give to ethical investments. But if they've got a huge investment that they don't necessarily know where that's going, they want to try and make a positive impact with that investment. And based on the fact that there's more regulatory requirements, more reason to do this, more reason for companies to undertake ethical practices, more people are going to invest, and that then drives investment growth. Okay, and in the future, potentially, we can see the integration of AI and technologies, which should reduce waste. It should also standardize how everyone does things, so there's not lots of different bodies with different criteria that has a different way of letting you know whether you're actually being ethical or not. And I think that is a little bit of an issue at the moment, and that's something that's called greenwashing, which is someone posing as an ethical investment or an ethical practice, but it actually isn't. So it's just pretending to be, and that's an issue that we see quite a bit. Okay, so solar panels, initial costs and of these sorts of things can be relatively high for upfront installation, but we know that over time, if anyone has them, or if anyone has spoken to anyone with solar panels, they would know about it, because they just do not stop speaking about solar panels. I don't have any, but I'm quite intrigued by them. And the upfront cost is fairly significant, but things like selling energy back to the grid at a higher rate and actually taking it in a cheaper time, harvesting energy, actually just being aware of how much energy costs, when you should use it, what the best time to use it is. I think that's actually quite beneficial as well. And of course, it's a natural resource, so why not harness that? Okay, same as wind and water. Obviously, that's not on a individual scale, but on a government level, there are going to be costs involved in initiating these. Initiating any of the technology and hardware, but actually over time that's going to reap the rewards, and it is a renewable source as well. The aim is not to run out of this energy. The aim is to reduce reliance on fossil fuels, and that has been the aim for a long time as well. Low carbon emissions, net zero, those types of initiatives are all part of making sure that we're using renewable energies instead of what we have been previously. So this is looking at ESG as an investment, and that can be in your pension. It could be in an ISA. It could be anywhere really. But if we're looking at ESG in terms of pensions, pensions will have a relatively long-term time horizon. Okay, so people will start a pension at the age of 18, maybe 25, and it will go all the way through until they're, say, 60, 65. That is a very long time. When I look at volatility, which means how much investments go up and down, ESG investments tend to be slightly more volatile than most other investments. Okay, partly because they're new, partly because of the range of funds that you're able to get within the investment markets. Imagine the investment markets are 8,000 funds, maybe more like 10 now. You've only got a very small proportion of the market as ESG funds. So already you're increasing the level of risk that you're taking, because you're only cornering some of the market. Okay, that leads to having difficulty finding the correct risk level that you should be at as well. So again, that becomes more volatile. So when you're choosing an ethical investment or an ESG investment, it's important to understand that there could be more disruption, there could be more volatility, and you'd have to weigh that up with whether you would like to do good, make an impact, provide funding for those sustainable projects, or do something slightly different and slightly safer, but not necessarily knowing exactly where the money's going. Okay. So on the second point, I mentioned companies do have an ESG score. And although you can have old style practices, for example, oil and gas, Shell, BP, for example, they will have an ESG score, and it could be an ESG score that is particularly good, because what they're doing now is putting charging points on lots of forecourts. They're making sure that their boards and governors are all that the pay is right, human resources are correct. They're also making sure that on a board level that men and women are equally represented, or attempting to do that, and lots of companies are doing that now. So although their primary business is oil and gas, actually they're branching out and doing things that are ethical, and making sure that they are looking after the environment in some way, and their social and governance parts are hitting the mark as well. I'll go over this briefly. Yes, there are operational risks of not adhering to the ESG criteria, and I mentioned earlier that BP had the issue with the oil spill, but they're moving to renewable energy, and that's less volatile than the oil and gas that they're known for, really. That then improves investor confidence. People are thinking, well, actually, now they're changing their ways, I'm likely to use their product, to use their service, to recommend them, and invest in them. And therefore, that creates that sustainable growth as an investment for the likes of BP. I've touched on BP already. So they have a pledge to be net zero by 2050, which I think is quite significant. Apple as well, who have also not been known for their human rights or human resources practices, said their operations will be carbon neutral by 2030, and Starbucks as well, investing heavily in diversity, and that then leaks into brand loyalty as well. So it's all good PR. I'm not saying they're not doing it for the right reasons, but it is very good PR, and it does improve how people view them. So the sustainable metrics going forward, there's a significant amount of growth within the ESG space. Yes, there's market volatility, but actually there's been a huge amount of growth. As you can see, 36% of the assets under management make up sustainable assets, and that's significantly more than had been previously. Okay, one of the major challenges was or is greenwashing, and it's a very difficult thing to prove. Now, I spoke to a client recently whose business is based on the DNA of cotton. Okay, so where the cotton comes from, where it's sourced, to make sure that it actually is ethically grown, picked, and there's an element of fair trade. So the clothes then can be well, you can find out exactly where that was made, how much they should have been paying for them, and that's actually a huge technology now that is going to enable people to prove that they are being ethical and that greenwashing isn't what they're doing. Okay. So I think the future of ethical investing is going to be around making sure that all the regulations are tightened up, so there's not lots and lots of different bodies with different metrics doing different things. Okay. The guidelines need to be a lot tighter to prevent things like greenwashing, to make sure that the criteria is right, and that actually when it comes to people's money that they're putting in, if it's 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, 100,000 of their investment is going to the right place. Okay. And I think AI is going to have a big role in that, because people will be able to see easily where their money's going, okay, and where it's not going. There is also there is a tolerance that you need to have with ethical investments, because although where the first part of the investment's going, every company is going to be trickling money down somewhere. So there has to be a level of tolerance to where that money could end up. And quite often it's, a 5% or 10% tolerance, that 10% of the money may go somewhere that you might not be happy with particularly, but 90% of the money, exactly where that's going. So it's important to know that you can't eke out everything that you believe to be unethical. There has to be a level of tolerance, otherwise you couldn't invest in anything. Okay. And over time, these models will grow. It will be important to and a staple in every single business that you come across, whether that's large or small. Okay. This is extremely important. You'll find this now with the different generations. Mine will be slightly different to the younger generations and older generations, but now more people are looking for work-life balance. More people are looking for sustainable practices. More people are looking for not necessarily more money. They're looking to make sure that the business that they're working for is doing good. Okay. So to attract better talent, that needs to be a staple in what the business is considering now and in the future as well. So the values are really important to younger generations, especially. Okay. It can differentiate you from the crowd. I think as long as it's genuine, as long as it's something you're doing to help and not for PR, I think it's quite an important part of any business. And it will give you a competitive advantage of someone who is just going to pay you more but treat you terribly, or not necessarily do the right thing by the environment, as an example. I don't know if anyone has seen Dan Price or seen anyone talk about Dan Price, but this is a very interesting example of being ethical. I think he was called the moral CEO. Is he the best boss in America? Well, he's not the boss anymore. I think he left in 2022. But what he did do was slashed his $1 million salary. Yes, he had $1 million salary, and he gave everyone the same wage. So everyone was paid $70,000 within the business, and the PR around that was insane, actually. Now, that would be part of the governance or social element or aspect. I don't think it was for PR. Actually, I think what he did was realize that $1 million salary was quite over the top, and therefore he equalized everything, and actually made a name for himself in doing so. And again, that was part of a wave of I'm going to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. It just so happens that brings a lot of PR and press along with it. Okay. I'm not suggesting anyone does this, or if anyone has a $1 million salary, but I think it's quite a cool story. So yes, there are going to be challenges with ethical investments. If you choose to move your pension wherever it is now into something that's ethical, you need to consider, right, is it actually going to the place I want it to go to? Is there a level of transparency in the investment that I'm moving everything to? The regulations that are in place now, are they going to stick around? Are there going to be other regulations that come in that mean that this investment actually isn't ethical anymore? Are there going to be upfront costs that I don't want to pay? Or am I willing to pay a little bit more for the chance to do good with my investment? Okay. Having seen, pre-COVID, having seen ethical investments outperform, say, normal investments, I think there is a place for ethical investments in any portfolio, whether that's because you want to do good or whether that's because you want long-term growth. But there needs to be an element of growth in terms of the funds available in order to reduce the volatility in the market. Okay. If there's not enough funds out there, then there's going to be a little bit more volatility. But the more funds you get, the more people take on ethical investments, the more pensions take on ethical investments and make it a standard, that will reduce volatility over time. Okay, so ethical investments, or ESG, it has moved from, this is a nice to have within a portfolio or within businesses to something that has to be necessary, that has to be within the practices somewhere, because you're scored on it, because it's part of the regulations, because it improves customer feedback. It also improves investment. There's lots of reasons why you'd want to have ESG practices within your organization. There is a balance between how much it's going to cost you, what the volatility is within those investments, to what you can see in the long term and what you can see in the future. I think the future is ethical investments, and therefore there's going to be scope for long-term growth within it. Should you adopt ESG practices? Yes, I think, as a charity, you obviously do, and I think it's important to you to do that. And I think in the future it will be about making sure that there's enough resources and funds to get the innovation right, to make sure that the regulatory bodies are coming together and all saying the same thing. And if there are any outliers or anyone who is doing the wrong thing, they're held accountable for that. And the less of the less cowboys out there, I think that the better it is for the ESG practices and the investments as well. Any questions?
So in terms of, for those people that have got small businesses or that are sole traders looking for either starting up or moving their pensions, is it as easy as going to a pension advisor like yourself and saying, look, I want to invest my pension in ESG companies or in specific projects that are sustainable? Is it as simple as that?
It can be. Every pension is going to have a limited amount of investment options. So, for example, a pension company might have 10 funds, and they might have one ethical fund out of those 10 funds. You may come across a pension provider that has 5,000 funds, and all of a sudden you have a lot more options within that pension fund, okay, to get an ethical investment. What we would do is see how important that ethical investment is to you. So firstly, based on the increasing cost or volatility and the options that you have available, is this something you still want? Yes or no? And if it's really important to you, then we would source a pension provider that puts that at the forefront of their funding list, and making sure they've got options available for you to use as an ethical investment.